behalf of ITTE, I'd like to thank Hull University for hosting our conference, and particularly Sarah Jones for organising the conference. I'm sure it's been very difficult to do. We've got a number of workshops. Everybody is welcome to come along to our workshops as well as for your own, so please do feel free to come along. I'm delighted that we have a number of our research fellows. So last year we funded some knowledge mobilisation research fellows. They're here today, they're going to be presenting, and their work will then be published in our journal, which is Technology, Pedagogy and Education. We have our AGM later on today, and our patron here, who we're absolutely delighted has been able to come and give a keynote. So I'll move swiftly on to introduce Jim, Lord Jim Knight of Weymouth. Jim is Chief Education Advisor for the TES, visiting professor at UCL's Knowledge Lab. He's been an MP, so he's worked as Minister for Rural Affairs, Schools and Employment, and is currently a member of the government's Digital and Engagement Council and Future of Work Commission. So we're very lucky to have Jim here, and if we could give him a welcome. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Oh, I'll turn my mic on as well. Okay, you can hear me. I think it'll all work now. Hello. Good morning. Nice to see you. I don't like that noise. I don't know about you. Does it have to do it again? I'll move over here. Maybe it's the. It's you, isn't it? You didn't want me to move over here because of the camera. What I want to talk about today is, to some extent, the importance of what, as patron of ITTE, but what teacher educators using technology and the importance of that role and keeping that going for our future. But what I really want to start with is telling you a little bit more about myself, to put that into context, because as a recovering politician, I like talking about myself. My ego is as significant as any other politician. And I want to start with my granddad. So if you look in the 1911 census, as I'm sure you all want to do, you'll find William Francis Harper, aged 15, a single man living in Wolverhampton, working as a locksmith. He was working in the Chubb factory in Wolverhampton, for those of you that know it. And he had gone to school in the local school founded by the Sisters of Mercy for the children of Irish immigrant families, to give them just about enough education for them to prosper in economic life. In other words, just about enough reading and writing for them to leave school at 13 and then go and work in a factory. And that indeed was William's destination. He did what the education system set him up to do, and off he went to Chubb's. But then the First World War came along. He signed up very quickly. He went and fought in the trenches. Happily, he survived the Somme. He survived all of those awful experiences. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here with you today. And one of the results of that social interaction that he had in the trenches, fighting with his comrades in arms, was he achieved a different set of ambitions to the ambitions that his education had set him up for. And he came out and he didn't want to go back to the factory. He wanted to go out on the road selling things, and effectively, as a result, he'd got a car and joined the middle classes. As a result of which, my mum went to grammar school. So she was lucky. She made the cut. She was one of those who just about got through her 11 plus. This is not a system I want to see return. I'm pretty glad that today's Queen's speech, I don't think we'll see any mention of grammar schools. But it did work pretty well for her because she was one of the lucky ones. And you could argue that the economy of the day, it worked pretty well because, if you could just cream off the top 25% in terms of ability as demonstrated at the age of 10, then there was enough employment in the unskilled sector of the economy at the time to mop up everybody else, regardless of the waste of talent that might have engendered and the lack of opportunity that gave a majority of the population. And indeed, at grammar school, this is Kettering Grammar School where she went. I don't think there's a picture of my mum there in that picture. That's just one I managed to steal off the internet. But she then met my dad, who went to the neighbouring boys' grammar school. Because, of course, not only were you sifted by ability at the age of 10 or 11, you're also sifted on the basis of gender. Now, my dad was also lucky enough to make the cut, as was his youngest brother. There were 4 of them in the family. The 2 middle brothers didn't manage it. So they, instead of joining the professions, my dad became an accountant, Uncle Hugh became a bank manager. The middle 2 joined the forces and agricultural labouring, and in the end, that divide within the family amongst the brothers continued all the way through the rest of their lives. And it's just a sort of side comment on one of the things that grammar schools perhaps did to people and families. But I won't dwell on that. But my dad comes out of that system an accountant. Didn't need to go to university, went into articles, learnt as he earned in that initial phase of his working life, and was successful. And as a result, he was able to afford to buy me and my brother the privilege of a private school education. So we went to Eltham College in London SE9, a school that really specialised in getting its boys into Cambridge and Oxford. And my brother and I were the first in our family to go to university. We both went to Cambridge, and we were very lucky as a result. And the promise that was never really written down for us, I'm going to try going over here again. I'm going to...
Just the microphone.
So if I just skip past quickly, I can come and talk to this side of the room for a bit. The promise that was never written down at the day for us in the early 80s, leaving school, was if you work hard, get good examination results in your O-levels and your A-levels, get into a great university, and then the world's your oyster. Get a job for life, join a final salary pension scheme, get a nice 25-year mortgage, pay that off, be able to provide well for your kids, and retire in your mid-50s. Great proposition. Golden time. So how did it, and that's how the economy worked out, and about 13% of people went to university at that time. So we were at a privileged time, but how did it work out for us? Well, my first job was as an actor at the age of 12, working for Cameron Mackintosh in a production in the West End, which I did for about 7 or 8 months whilst I was still at school. And I fell in love with theatre. That's really all I did when I was at university, whilst allegedly studying for a geography degree. And then I went on to run theatre. I set up a theatre company, and then went on to run some theatres before I realised that actually a career in the arts probably wasn't for me compared to the prospect of perhaps going to politics. So I got a job with a next door neighbour selling telephone directory advertising to pay the rent whilst I learned how to be a politician. And that was a really shit job. And I did that for 10 years. I did a few other things as part of that, and I became director of the business. In the end, I managed to get out of sales and started my love of technology at that point as I took over the production process for this directory business, but it was still a shit job. But it did allow me to become a politician in the end. And so I got elected as an MP. I, in the end, had a 5-year ministerial career, including 3 years as Minister of State for schools. And eventually, of course, in 2010, electoral gravity caught up with me, and I lost my seat, and Gordon put me into the House of Lords. So that's, let's say, 3 careers: theatre, directory publishing, politics, and then and then here I am. So what am I up to? So I'm now enjoying somewhat more of a commercial career. So I work as the Chief Education Advisor at TES. We don't call it the TES anymore, or Times Ed, just for clarity's sake.
Sure,
We definitely call it TES.
That's for Teresa, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a sign of age, actually. If you call it Times Ed, it implies you're definitely over 50. If you call it TES, you're sort of most people. If you call it TES, it means you work for TES. But there you go. So I juggle that along with a little bit of politics in the House of Lords, which is still a bit of a part-time thing, but it's an important role in trying to hold whatever government will get thrown at us to account and to improve legislation. And then the bit in the middle is I also chair and own a stake in a business that's diagnosing malaria using iPhones. It's also it's doing analysis of air samples for asbestos and mold as well. So I juggle these different things in this, my fourth career. And why is all of that relevant? Apart from it's very interesting because it's about me. I think it's interesting in that I think this is the way we're going to be in terms of transitioning through multiple careers. And that's the economy and the working life that we are preparing teachers to teach young people for. And what does the labour market look like? Well, of course, there's nothing new to be said here. This is a friend of mine, Professor Linda Grattan's work from a long time ago. She's a professor at the London Business School that looks at levels of skill and what the effect of technology and globalisation is on those levels of skill, and essentially taking out the middle level of skill through technology and migration and generating some more higher skilled work, and we have acute demand for some of those higher skills, and losing a little bit on the low skilled end, although she doesn't get into that in this particular graph, but we're starting to see that now since she did that work. So that's going on in the labour market. And then the other thing that's, I think, of great significance is Linda's latest work, a book she published last year with Andrew Scott, who's an economist at Oxford and the London Business School, is about the effect of longevity. So a child that starts school this September in reception has a more than 50% chance of living to over 100. Now, that's just significant. It's significant because they can't afford, and the state can't afford, for them to retire at least until they're 80. And that's fine, because the advances in medical technology means they're not going to be decrepit by the time they're 80. We might have worked out how to rejuvenate ourselves completely by then. Because, of course, that means they're probably going to be working virtually until the turn of the century. But it does mean they're going to have a 60-year working life. Now, remember what the promise was to me, that I could retire at 55? That I might have had a 30-year working life. And if we're now looking at doubling that working life, that changes quite a lot about that world that we are launching young people into. What I think it means is we move from what Linda and Andrew describe as this three-stage life of doing education, of having a moment where we graduate and celebrate leaving learning behind, and then going on into the second stage of work, and then having this glorious stage of retirement when we pursue the things that we always really wanted to do until we die, to one where education and work go in lockstep. We will be learning and earning simultaneously, and we need a culture of continuous learning, and retirement may happen. But it may be that we carry on doing some kind of work all the way through for as long as we have the capacity to do so. And certainly, given that I now have a job for life in the House of Lords, that's what I'll be doing.
Good job.
Well, it's kind of a job.
Yeah.
So you then say, well, what's the implication for education? and schooling if we are having to prepare young people for that. And this is just one of the countless things. I did a version of this talk however long ago, probably a month ago in Kent. And that morning, I picked up this article on Medium, the blogging platform, by some Silicon Valley CEO. And this is what he'd set out to be the kind of skills that he's looking to hire, that he thinks education should be designing for. And if I think about how much we currently prepare young people for in the curriculum, I don't see memorization and content recall written up there. It's odd, isn't it? And yet it seems to be something...
It's implicit.
It's obviously implicit. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And undoubtedly, the cognitive development that we get out of knowledge and the sense that we have a framework of knowledge with which to filter all of the content that's coming at us through our phones, I think is important. It shouldn't be forgotten by dangerous progressives like me. But nevertheless, I think there's a massive case for change if we think that education in part, is about developing young people to have a prosperous future in work of some form. But most importantly, we need a system for lifelong learning, for exactly that sort of learning including at whatever age that little woman is at, and including learning off your phone. Which I think will be the most significant learning device for us, and I know there are people here who know way more about this than I do. So what does that mean for schools? Is there a role for them? Will they just become some redundant anachronism of an industrial age as we move into a digital one? Well, I don't know about the buildings. I think it is important to have an environment for learning where you can do things that you can't do anywhere else, because they're designed for learning and they're designed for bringing learners together. So personally, I think there is a future for places called schools. But I also think it's important to decide whether or not we want to design for a utopian or a dystopian future. And we kind of think about utopia as being this ridiculous, idealistic notion, but we talk about dystopia a lot. And I think the opposite of dystopia is a utopia. So, I'm happy to be a utopian in that context. Now, I'm doing a little bit of work at the moment with the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. And to an extent, we're starting with this challenge. So, UNESCO last year published their analysis of the amount of teachers that we would need if we are to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, particularly SDG 4, around quality primary and secondary education for every child. And as you can see from this poster, we need 69 million teachers globally by 2030 to teach the additional 263 million children who are currently out of school around the world. That's a lot of teachers. Now we look at this country where we already have the legacy of being able to graduate a lot of people into teaching as a postgraduate profession, and we still find it very hard to recruit enough teachers, especially in the subjects that we think are most important culturally. Maths, English, physics, at TES we see acutely those shortages because we have a place in teacher recruitment, and it's significant, and it's particularly significant in some parts of the world. I would guess recruiting a maths teacher here in Hull is pretty tough. It's probably a little bit tougher in Grimsby, because it's not the city of culture. And the current system we have in this country rewards the most successful schools because they can